Hi, everyone. So, my name is David Ng. I'm a member of Seize the Means of Production Video Co op, which is a unionized worker cooperative based in Vancouver. We are really excited to be producing this project on race, labor, and the values of worker co ops with the support of the Canadian Worker Co op Federation. There's currently a window display on the studio windows of the Union Cooperative Initiative in Chinatown in Vancouver at 525 Carroll Street by Clare Yow, who's in conversation with us today, that features archival images and articles about worker solidarity in racialized communities. And in today's panel conversation, we will be exploring these intersectional themes of race, labor, migration, colonialism, and worker co ops more deeply with our special guests. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that Seize the Means Video Co-op organizes from the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. As uninvited guests, we recognize and extend our gratitude to the stewards of this land who have been protecting it since time immemorial. Part of our work as activists and artists on unceded territories means working in solidarity with ongoing Indigenous struggles for sovereignty, decolonization, reparations, and land back. Now to introduce our guest today, Clare Yow. Clare Yow is a Vancouver-based visual artist working primarily in photography with documentary as its basis, interrogating the politics of identity, community, labor, and loss as a first-generation Chinese-Canadian immigrant settler, daughter, mother, and auntie. Her practice has taken on various forms of making, from the artist book Accumulations to the public art billboard Slow New Wave and the documented food performances of Commonwealth. Claire's work also extends into United Aunties Arts Association and Vancouver Status of Women's Coordinating Collective. She holds an MFA in visual art and an honors BFA in photography studies and has been exhibiting since 2003. Rita Wong is a poet scholar who attends to the relationships between water, justice, ecology, and decolonization. She has edited an anthology with Dorothy Christian entitled Downstream Reimagining Water, based on a gathering that brought together elders, artists, scientists, writers, scholars, students, and activists around the urgent need to care for the waters that give us life. An associate professor in critical and cultural studies at Emily Carr University of Art and Design, Wong has served her faculty association as a steward and president. Wong works to support Indigenous communities' efforts towards justice and health for water, having witnessed such work at Peace River, the Wet'suwet'en, Adits, Fairy Creek, the Columbia River, the Fraser River, the Salish Sea, and the Arctic Ocean watershed. She understands that when these waterways are healthy, life, including people, will be healthy too, and that we cannot afford to endanger and pollute the waters that sustain our lives. Great. So, welcome, Claire and Rita. Excited to be chatting with both of you today. Maybe, Claire, I wanted to start with the beautiful artwork that you created for us. Can you tell us the inspiration behind your piece? And it's titled Trouble, a report on Oriental activities within the province.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to share this virtual space with you and Rita today as Chinese diasporic kin. So I guess I'll mention the title. So actually in 1927, a report titled just that, a report on Oriental activities within the province, was presented to the BC legislature. And so I borrowed from that title, putting the word Oriental into quotations. And so the work for the window displays was born out of work that I started in about 2022. It was in advance of the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Immigration Act. And so this was an act that was also known as the Chinese Exclusion Act. And what it did was it across so-called Canada banned the immigration of people of Chinese descent or origin for 24 years. And so that act has had rippling effects for generations. And so I started a project to look at the exclusion era years. I was really interested in using archives as a way to, as kind of like a springboard for creating artworks that would be rooted in these historical documents, but that would also tie to present day issues. Because really, the same forces that gave
Mm.
rise to the Chinese Exclusion Act are the same forces that of colonization, settler colonialism, exclusionary laws that still operate as intended today. So that's something that I knew the Chinese community would be marking this big anniversary, but I wanted as an artist to kind of put my own spin on it, so to speak. And
Mhm.
so the displays do focus on the working poor and specifically on racialized labor, and examples of worker solidarity, organizing, labor revolts amongst Chinese, Japanese, and South Asian workers. So, what I did was delve into research I've been doing in the archives for a number of years.
Mhm.
And it's really interesting to see what has been documented, collected, and preserved, because it's these archives have been created and maintained within a colonial context.
Mhm.
And so after 3 years of looking at lots of records that had, heavy examples of like xenophobia, and just really disdain for Orientals, I wanted to actually focus on examples of meaningful solidarity amongst workers, people really trying to resist the exploitation of them. And so I drew out specific acts of resistance through these newspaper clippings and photographs, focusing on the period of 1920 to 1927. So, for example, on the big window displays,
Mhm.
the backgrounds are three posed photographs of workers at sawmills and lumber yards. And so this was a rarity I found, having combed through the archives, seeing that direct gaze between the workers and the photographer, who was probably a white photographer. I think two
Mm.
of them were unknown, who took the photo. So I really wanted to draw out these examples, and I think today, within our context, that within the context of our discussion on labor unions and worker co-ops, yeah, it's important to say that labor unions historically were privileging of white labor, and they perpetuated white supremacist ideologies that excluded, barred, undercut Indigenous and other non-white workers. So that was through exclusionary hiring practices, low wages, subpar working conditions, boycotts. These racialized workers were beholden to their employers, because
Mhm.
they'd be threatened with deportation. And I see a lot of connections to what's happening today as well.
Mhm.
And actually, specifically, the displays that are showing at the Lim Association in Vancouver's Chinatown, the race riots that were huge in September 1907, and that directly impacted Chinese and Japanese businesses in Chinatown. It was actually perpetuated by the Asiatic Exclusion League, which was it was kind of there was an American branch, but also a Canadian branch. And the Canadian branch was formed under the guise of the Vancouver Trades and Labor Council. So that's a direct connection between labor, um, and the racialized workers, being impacted. And what I didn't know was that a couple of days later, the Chinese community called for a general strike of all laborers.
Mhm.
So you see an example of some newspaper clippings on the displays. So all workers, cooks, lumberyard workers, they all struck, and that's pretty big. And lastly, the text that you see on the displays come from Dr. Winnie Ng, who
Mhm.
is a Toronto based labor rights scholar, educator, organizer. And Dr. Ng gave me permission to use these words, and I think they're so important in terms of tying to tying workers' rights to intersecting identities, whether it's race, sex, class. I think the class piece is something I'm really have been embedding into my work more, speaking about my work, and I think that part is really crucial when we talk about workers' rights. So I'll end it there, and yeah, thank you for commissioning this brand new work.
No, thank you so much, Claire. And you really touched on this interconnection between race and labor. Rita, I'm curious, as someone who does organizing work, I'm curious what comes to mind after hearing some of these themes that have come out of Claire's work.
Yeah, I really appreciate all this research and work that you've done, Claire, to bring this together and to put it in a visible space so we can grapple with it, because it makes it really clear the patterns of racial capitalism that have,
Mhm,
been going on for so long, and that kind of divide and conquer tactic that is still being used so prevalently today. Um, it also, I think, I really appreciate the highlighting of the solidarity that happened and the ways in which um, there's such pressure on people. Like, it's not easy to like organize like that, and like you can only imagine the kinds of you know uh, horrible conditions that people would have been under in order to push them to get their acts together like that, right? Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
just really on the one hand, horrible, but on the other hand, heartening that people do get it together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was also struck by just the language has changed. Like, the term celestial comes up, for example, in the archives,
mhm,
and today it might be the foreign worker or whatever, but it's still the same kind of hierarchy and kind of dehumanization of
mhm,
people and the reduction of our dignity, basically.
mhm,
Mm-hmm.
Um, I um, I was curious to think about um, just there was also an indigenous union, the Bows and Arrows, like the longshoremen, and I think it's hard to find that trace in the archives, but I'm interested in thinking about the ways in which the labor did not was forced into complicity with the destruction of the land. And I
mm,
was thinking about it also in terms, there's a book called Climate Change is Class War. And the argument in the book is basically that we need to organize the workers who are in the midst of the energy production or the resource extraction, because the health impacts, the negative health impacts, start there, right? Not just
mhm,
on the consumption side, but on the production side.
mm,
So, yeah, because it is um, the other piece of what I'm trying to grapple through is the need for solidarity, but also the need for solidarity with ways of living on the land that are sustainable or
mhm,
that respect indigenous knowledges and laws, right?
right.
And so there's kind of yeah, there's a tension there, because I don't think um, we've been always able to do that very well. And
Mm,
I think about the union movement today, like it was the trades that were very active around lobbying for and supporting the Site C Dam, which was
Mm-hmm.
opposed by the
mm,
West Woburley and other Treaty 8 First Nations, right? So that kind of um, question of how we balance, or I do believe that it is possible and necessary for workers and for the labor movement to respect and abide by indigenous knowledges and not just kind of fall into that extraction model that the bosses impose on us. But it's not an easy task to navigate. That's kind of where I think about it today, but I also see historically how it was also difficult, and that there were alliances that we know of in relationships
mm,
despite these machines or this kind of system that's basically a death drive.
Mm.
Claire, your piece, like two things came up for me. It was, first, as was already mentioned, like even under like really horrible circumstances, like oppressed working people have always found a way to organize. We've been thinking about this a lot, and this was sort of the inspiration behind this project because when we started Seize the Means, like the worker co-op, and I started sort of getting involved in that world, and I come from gender studies, women's studies, social
Mm.
justice a place, and I started seeing a lot of these values of like grassroots solidarity building, mutual aid that I see infused in a lot of the worker co-op movements that are being organized.
Mm.
And so I've been thinking about that a lot of like these strategies that we have around building capacity and sharing resources have always been something that has sustained us and also been the backbone of like resistance. um, I'm also thinking, Claire, you mentioned, you referenced some of the Tong societies, like the benevolent associations as well, and I've been thinking about those a lot because as I've also been looking at some of the archival articles about the benevolent associations that are often quite racist, but you kind of also what comes through is it's people coming together to support each other under segregation.
Mm.
There was an article that one of the Lim elders, I did a little piece about this a few years ago at the Lim building, where it said the headline was "Big Cleanup for Chinese," and they essentially there was a bathhouse that was installed in the Lim Association building, and what I read about it though was it was really a kind of a PR thing for the association to kind of like resist this type of stereotyping of Chinese people as dirty. And so I think I don't know. I was seeing some of these sort of like people coming together to support each other under these really terrible conditions. The second one,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, and you mentioned, both of you have already mentioned this, was like the obvious. I just wanted to point out the obvious, like this reoccurring anti-immigration cycle that we are seeing, this yellow peril thing, but also extended to other racialized bodies as well. And of course, David Eby and Polivier's statement and attacking the temporary foreign workers as sort of this taking Canadian jobs as a sort of like thing that just keeps coming
Mm.
time and time again. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's incredible. Yeah, just to see the connections between what you're saying, David and Rita too. Like that's something, yeah, that I grapple with too as an artist working in Chinatown. Like this, what does solidarity look like from our different class positionalities? So that's something I grapple with. And Rita, you were mentioning celestial, the celestials as a slur, and you had shared with us. Um, uh, uh, the term celestial solidarity. And I was, sorry, I'm forgetting the name of the person who referenced it.
Oh,
Mengju
Mangju Fu.
Fu. Yeah.
Thank you. Um, yeah, just talking about like the spiritual as part of that aspect too, because it's about material, you know, material needs, but also the spiritual is a big part of it too. And thinking about the land and our spiritual connections to the land too. So it's really heartening just knowing the work that you do, that you think this is possible. It's possible to have a bit of a balance between the trades and and economic development, but also like being very mindful of these extractive predatory economies. That's something I'm like trying to connect all the dots with as someone um, whose art practice started talking about like racism and sexism, like as it
Mm.
relates to me, but now really just seeing like the tentacles of these like roots of oppression. So that's where what both of you were saying kind of really resonated here.
Yeah, and I forgot to say earlier, I really appreciate you referencing Winnie Eng.
Mm,
Like we build on the shoulders of those who came before us,
yes.
and Winnie is definitely somebody who I respect very
Mm,
deeply. I also wanted to mention Lee Miracle as well as I
yes.
often do, but um, it's kind of this question, like those narratives that are like demonizing or scapegoating racialized workers, they have at the heart the center of the boss as the, like, whose story are we in, right?
Mm,
Are we
Mm.
in the story of the land and the people of the land? That's the narrative that I am part of, or that I want to be part of. But this colonial distraction and deflection is constantly like, trying to rip or ignore that story and pull us into this other story that
mm,
is a really toxic one.
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Read.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead, Claire.
Oh, I was just gonna say, Lee Miracle absolutely. I actually try to reference this one line of hers in like all my talks. Is like, it's not just a fight against violence, but a fight for peace. And so
Mm.
that's
Mm,
something I think about a lot as a racialized woman. And what do I want my fight to be? So thank you,
mm.
Rita, for that.
Cool.
Rita, I seem to recall, and maybe I just dreamed this, but did we not have a conversation a couple years ago about I think you were talking about like trying to include the land in a collective agreement? Did I?
We did a land acknowledgement in a collective agreement,
Okay,
yes.
okay.
And actually, do I have a copy of it with me right now? Maybe not.
Because it makes me, I'm just thinking, sorry, what you
Mhm.
said earlier around thinking the trades and land, and it made me think about I think Rita, you've said this before, but a lot of my Indigenous colleagues have talking about land as a relative, and
Mhm.
so in thinking, I'm just thinking about like if in this conversation around labor equity intersecting with racial equity and thinking about collective agreements
Mhm.
and also thinking about the land in the same or in relation to those types of relationships, and so that's what sort of sparked that memory of that conversation.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about that. I'm just pulling it up actually, and
Yeah, yeah, no worries.
um,
Sorry to put you on the spot,
no,
but
that's fine. Yeah, we do have a preamble in our collective agreement that acknowledges that we're on the unceded traditional ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples.
mm,
But beyond the land acknowledgement, we also negotiated a decolonization and indigenization fund. It's not a huge amount of money, it's just a little bit, but it is accessible for faculty to use to support around that work, right?
mm, mm, mm.
So, towards like educating yourself or inviting a elder or a knowledge keeper to come into your classes or things like that.
Yeah,
So, yeah, we felt it was important to not just have something symbolic, but also something that's tangible, right? That's
right.
Hmm.
ongoing. And I also want to go back to this question about the labor movement because I think like we need a just transition. So the union
Mm,
movement in health, in education, in sectors that are low carbon, right?
mm,
I think is really important. And it's been interesting to see there's a group in Alberta called Iron and Earth. They're like former tar sands workers who are trying to get trained up in solar energy and renewable energy skills. So like the solutions have to come from the workers themselves as
mm,
well as everybody else who's trying to kind of move us in the right direction.
right.
um,
Hmm.
so yeah, that is, I think, not easy to do given the kinds of structures that we have to navigate within, but it's still really important to keep trying.
Right. In our previous conversation before this chat, Chris Smalls came up. And I love the way he connects labor, capital, empire building in his organizing, and of course, people have been talking about him recently because of his work for Palestine liberation, as intertwined with Black and working people solidarity. So I'm just curious, maybe from either of you, what from Chris's organizing, what has Chris's organizing made you think about or inspired you?
Yeah, um, he's so courageous to go on the Handala, on the
Mm,
flotilla, and he paid I think, a heavy price for that, but he went and he continues to speak out. I have like so much respect
Mm-hmm.
for that work, and for the internationalist view that he has,
Mm-hmm.
right? That you also referenced. And I think he actually came up to Vancouver years ago when the Amazon workers were organizing here. And so he, like, I really appreciate him as an example of somebody who, like, spends the time on the ground with the workers and with the people, and stays grounded in that, right? Like, that is just so important.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and oh, there's something else I was gonna say, but now I don't remember.
Mm.
Okay.
For me, I just love how he like has been so vocal about talking about like, the intertwinedness or of colonialism and capitalism, and how capital accumulation has always needed, exploitation of labor, first by slavery, then indentured labor, and now we're seeing, in this hyper capitalist stage of capitalism that we're in. And he talks about how, like, um, even organizing with Amazon, who's very much embedded with the Israeli military, and how he doesn't see that sort of separation with labor, but also with Black liberation, and with Palestinian liberation, with the broader, as Rita, you're mentioning, this really internationalist, interconnected international web of colonialism and capitalism. Yeah, and of course, just to make one more point, I was reading this article about after he was detained by the IOF. It's obviously also not a surprise that I think he was the only one that was beaten.
Yeah.
And so, this targeting of Black and brown bodies by those systems that we're speaking about also comes as no surprise.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was listening to the Upstream podcast episode with him, following
Mm,
his experience on the flotilla, and he referenced the labor slogan: "An injury is what to one is an injury to all." And
mm,
he said, "Yeah, this his work as an organizer cannot exclude Palestine." And so
mm,
I love, I'm inspired by people like him making those connections, right, between what does collective liberation actually look like when we talk about, yeah, organizing workers at Amazon,
yeah.
but also tying it to genocide, and this, yeah, the US empire's like really desperate attempts to colonize still in the face of like a crumbling empire now. And so
Mm,
those are all kind of, like you said, woven together deeply.
mm,
So yeah, really appreciating, yeah, like Rita, you said, the courage to speak out, just knowing, um, as a Black man, he's got a target
yeah.
on his back.
Yeah. Um, yeah. And when we see that kind of courage, I think it helps to give us strength to be courageous wherever we
Yes.
are, in whatever ways we can be, as well. And I so appreciate him for that. I saw this video. It was a young Asian American student on hunger strike, I think, and he it's on Chris Maul's Instagram, I think, and
Mm,
Mm,
he sent, so Chris Maul doesn't know this guy, but he sends him a video, like, encouraging him,
mm,
and supporting him in his effort, and like that kind of just generosity or
mm.
humanness, I really appreciate as well. And I think I remember what I was going to say. It was like that kind of like grassroots organizing is so important. And
mhm,
it's also people, like, if we're thinking about labor organizers, people like Jane McAlevey have also been really important in my formation, as is in terms of how I approach the work. And one of the things that Michael Levy does that I really appreciate is, she encourages open bargaining.
Mm,
So, like,
mm,
instead of having just like a small little team of people that can be easily kind of, you know, um, undermined, you make it open so that any of your members can come in when you're in negotiations, and that opens up the question of the process, and it also makes it more transparent and more like, involved for everybody.
mm,
And so, this question of how involved are we in the decisions that affect us, You know, whether we're talking about governments or whether we're talking about corporations, both
Mm,
of them seem very designed, unfortunately, to kind of minimize grassroots and public participation in decision making.
Mm.
And I think there's a
mm,
real danger in that, because you make worse decisions that
right.
don't that only benefit the elite and then don't benefit everybody else. You know, we're seeing that play out in the government right now, unfortunately,
Mm,
big time. And it's so sad, because we're living in a province that should have a government that knows better. But you
mm,
saw it, sorry, a little bit of a detour, but it does relate, I hope.
mhm,
And
mhm,
like the leadership race in the BC NDP, like Anjali Appadurai was a very strong candidate.
Mm-hmm.
And they
mhm,
just used basically procedural kind of machinations to prevent her from having a fair and open debate and an actual vote. And like, so when our own decision making processes don't work, there's no trust, no faith, no like credibility in these
mhm.
systems, right?
Yeah. I want to move on to sort of thinking about strategies and yeah, strategies moving forward. What does solidarity look like, and what have been some organizing strategies within liberation struggles that you have seen recently that have stood out? We've talked a little bit about this already, but I just wanted to make some space to explore that a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for me, I've had an art studio in Chinatown since 2018, and I've seen a lot of change come through, in my building and also within the neighborhood. And um, I've been seeing groups that are not, they're not co-ops or unions, but they're just like local community groups. And I just like am very impressed by the way that they are cross multi-generational. They have multiple languages, and like the elders are brought into the work to lead and to learn.
Mm,
I just think that's really, and an example would be Chinatown Together or
Hmm.
Yarrow
mhm,
Intergenerational Society. Those two groups like have been, it's just so heartening to see them talk about unhoused neighbors, to talk about the toxic drug poisoning crisis, and actually translating it for people in the neighborhood. I feel like that's a good step forward towards what collective liberation can look like. And I'm really heartened to see examples of it, because I think Chinatown is a hard place to live and work in. It's very divisive. And just, you know, as someone with middle class privilege, in my upbringing, I just trying to think about working class solidarity is really important for me right now. And
mhm,
I think these groups have been, I don't know, this is something that actually Bell Hooks talks about, like ruling class groups and how, what did she say? She said, allegiance to class interests usually supersede racial solidarity. And so and I think she was referencing, I was rereading a book of hers, and she talks about a lot about the Black upper class folks.
mm,
So this idea that we can talk about class as a way to help end class elitism, I think
mm,
that's something that's, especially in Chinatown, feels like a step in the right direction. I wouldn't not have been able to touch like the conversation around class, 5 years ago. But I think this push to just really understand what solidarity means for me as an artist, and to see that as a value, show up in grassroots groups has been really heartening.
yeah, I
Mm.
always think about Chinatown Cares, that
Mm,
program that they just came together within two
yeah,
weeks or something when quarantine happened,
yeah.
and started a
Hmm.
WhatsApp group and started delivering groceries to elders, like culturally appropriate groceries to
Hmm.
elders. And it just like, really makes me think, going back again to like, um I hate bringing up the pandemic, but what did the when everything when the when when the state abandoned these elders,
Hmm.
essentially, you know this strategy of mutual aid, which has
Yeah.
always which has always been a part of anti-racist organizing. You know, I'm thinking about the
Mm-hmm.
Black Panthers being the obvious example,
Mm-hmm.
but that has always been a way and a strategy of survival, but also resistance. And I've
Mm-hmm.
been thinking about it a lot because, you know, we recently, Love Intersections had a board retreat, and we've been really thinking about sort of thinking what is the purpose of our work in this era of increased, you know, this fascist turn to fascism, anti-immigration, this, you know, attack on affirmative action and all of this. What where does our work go? And I keep going back to this idea that, you know, we actually have these solutions. We know we've and these and yes, you know, this is not to say that we shouldn't come up with new ideas, but we actually have the solutions in our communities. And I just keep coming back to it because again, when I think about the values of like worker co-ops, worker solidarity, anti-racist organizing, a lot of these themes just keep coming up as things that you know, as we've talked about from your piece, Claire, from the beginning, that communities have always done.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry, I rambled on a little bit, but many thoughts that came to mind. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, just to add, absolute hands up to Yarrow and Chinatown Together. I also really appreciate the work of Solid State out in Surrey. I think they've
Mm-hmm.
been doing some
Yeah.
really great work.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually more organizations that I think than I can name here. But I was also thinking about what you just said, David, about the solutions, because I think the land that was here healthily intact is very much part of that solution.
Mm.
And so like the work of the Tsawatooth, for instance, to try to heal the water and restore clam beds, and you know, they're doing that through the Sacred Trust and through their nation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if I would call it a worker co-op, but I think it's a grouping or an organization that is really doing important work. And
Mm-hmm.
so like we need the natural systems intact and to renew themselves, and not be
Mm.
kind of poisoned and incapacitated by industries that are messing with it. And I just wanted to mention, like right now, I'm really watching what's happening up north on Gitxsan territory, because the Gitxsan have been really very vocal in opposing the PRGT pipeline and the C. Lissom's terminal. But I am really worried that this whole colonial ramp up in extraction is going to prevent those solutions that we already have and
Mm.
that we need to strengthen from happening. Like that's my biggest fear. One of my biggest fears. Sorry,
Mm.
there's many fears. Like empires are most dangerous when they're collapsing, and I
Mm-hmm.
think we're seeing that
Yeah.
in real time, and it is
Mm.
scary.
Mm-hmm.
But the health of the land, I think, has to be like the baseline or the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
And the ways in which we orient ourselves around that is really important.
Yeah.
Also, I wanted to just mention that the Palestinian solidarity movement has also been something that I have been really heartened by, even though we still haven't stopped the genocide, even though people are still really like heartbroken and distraught, and we don't have words for what's happening in terms of the violence that's being inflicted on so many people in Palestine
Mm-hmm.
and other parts of the area around there. But it's very clear to me that the logic that dehumanizes them is the logic that dehumanizes us and also makes us invadable and bombable and all those other things
Mm-hmm.
that have been happening. That Palestine is the test case, if you will, or
Mm-hmm.
as Angela Davis, I think, and others have said, the moral litmus test, right? Like, and so like to I think 2 years in now, like you know, I think almost everybody's exhausted and heartbroken, but we're still gathering, we're
Yeah.
still organizing, we're still like staying connected, and I think that's part of the long haul, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember reading somewhere too, and Rita, you might know a little bit more about this too, but also the environmental destruction, not just specifically from Gaza, but like the global implications of
Yeah.
that war to the planet, like
Mhm.
Yeah.
environmentally, has been devastating. So yeah, just I'm thinking about that a lot as you're bringing in the land also in this conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, visualizing Palestine has some really
Mhm.
informative graphics around that.
Mm.
And yeah, I think I don't know if visualizing Palestine is a co-op or how they're exactly organized, but I really appreciate the work they have been doing to educate us.
Yeah, and they
Yeah.
also I have their book behind me,
Oh,
but
okay.
they're really fantastic because I think they're quite open source, and
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
they let you and want you to sort of take the material, and they're happy for people to reuse it. Yeah, they're doing fantastic work.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Rita, I want to say I'm just in awe at your institution how faculty and staff have also just like been outspoken about Palestine in a way that and the scholasticide, right? Like the decimation of educations education systems, like institutions. It's incredible, and I just think of like the top down, the ways that you know higher education has been just attacked, students who've put themselves on the line, um, to be outspoken about Palestine. It's
Mm-hmm.
incredible.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanting to really, seeing pockets of that in the city is really incredible and inspiring. And I think kind of like Chris Smalls, like it's inspiring to make me want to do more, to be emboldened and to keep speaking out.
One of the student organizers at VIU, Sarah Kashawi, came and spoke at the Freedom School at the Vine's Den
Mm,
in August. And I was so impressed by her. Like,
Mm.
like she has really, I think, being penalized by her university for speaking out about things that the university should also be speaking out about.
mhm,
Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's a baseline for humanity, and the university isn't meeting it. But anyways, Sarah Kashawi, but her sense of perspective is that like so many family members and people are dead, like that so you're gonna expel me or whatever. So what? Like it's just
yeah.
laughable in the scale of the destruction that is happening and continues to happen, right?
Mhm,
And that our institutions are so silent and complicit about. And I have to say, it's actually the students themselves
mhm,
that have been, I think, inspiring me and keeping me honest, because it's easy to just get tired and kind of like, we all get exhausted.
mhm,
But the students come in, they organize, they keep speaking out, and it's not any single individual student because it's a collective movement, right? People
Mm-hmm.
get tired, they rest, they get quiet. Other people step up and speak. Like it is something. I remember Vanessa Richards saying to me once years ago, like, I think she had heard me just give a talk and I think I was exhausted. And she kind of came up to me afterwards and she's like, in a choir, it's okay to go away and rest for a while when you need to and come back and sing
mhm,
when you're ready, like
Mm.
that we really need to not burn ourselves out. It's hard
mhm.
not to when we're facing this extinction machine going 24/7 at us, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that power of staying human, I think,
Mm,
is how we keep going somehow. Yeah.
Yeah.
mm.
What you're saying, Rita,
Yeah.
reminds me of I think the NAP ministry.
Yes.
Yes, I love
I
that
I love
project.
that as
Mhm,
Yeah.
essentially a form of resistance to capitalism. Of like we
mhm,
actually like I think they so not only do they have writing, but they actually do these public like napping
yes.
sessions,
Yes.
thinking
Yeah.
about the importance of like rest in our organizing too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that helps build sustainability, I think. This idea that, yeah, thinking about co-ops and some of those values, I think what is the long-term, you know, goal individually as individuals. How can we sustain ourselves, but
Mm-hmm.
together, strengthening that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think about this, because I imagine, like, I imagine the three of us are similar in the sense that, like, the work that we do around this topic is so inseparable from our lives. It's not like something like 9 to 5 and then I can kind of close the door, close my laptop, and then it goes away. And I've been thinking about that a lot in terms of burnout too, because it's also obviously, as you know, Rita, you mentioned the extinction machine going 24/7 all around us all the time. And that is the amount of, you know, not we obviously can't shut that off, but then thinking about these strategies of, like, rest as a part of that sort of sustaining ourselves is so important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, rest and also joy and also
Mm,
creativity. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yeah.
which is why I also so much appreciate your work, Claire.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Likewise to both of you.
Maybe that actually leads to a kind of a semi-closing question that I had. Claire, I'm curious, from your work as an artist, what do you hope people, maybe about the piece, what do you hope people will feel? What do you hope
Mm.
from the work when people see the work? But also in general too, your work as an artist, what do you hope people
Mm-hmm.
will feel and take away?
Yeah, I mean, it's always exciting when my work is not within like the confines of a white cube. I think that is
Mm,
traditionally where art can reside, but to actually have it at street level, I think is exciting for me because I hope that people take the time and read the quotes, read some of the newspaper clippings. Um, you know, I think a lot about this idea of progress, right? Have we come have we actually come that far in 100 years? Um, I'm not sure. I don't know, but I feel like I would love people who would normally not be in our circles, who already have awareness of the ways that all these systems of domination and oppression they intersect. I think for me, my goal as an artist, which is a goal for myself too, is always just connecting those dots. I think realizing that it's so much bigger than my own identity, and my own, concerns. It's actually, systemic and structural. I just would love people who maybe haven't had that switch flick for them, that maybe this can help. And I would love if people had chance encounters with it, because I imagine that people are going to hear about it through, our networks perhaps. But if, just someone who encounters it can stop and reflect, I think that's powerful. I think art doesn't really exist unless there's engagement with it. There's an audience. So that's my hope, which is so interesting because I don't think I like really thought about it too much. I knew I wanted to make this piece. It'd been kind of stewing for a while.
mhm.
Um, yeah, just connecting all those dots because we're all so interwoven with each other. And then as someone who thinks a lot about my own privilege, how to help others, maybe perhaps with similar backgrounds, also connect those dots.
Yeah, Claire, your piece really, we talked quite a bit about sort of um, the how specifically this anti-immigration uh, discourse keeps coming back again and again and
Mm-hmm.
again. And I've been thinking about this a lot, as we've also been looking at history, and as this piece looks at history, what do we do with those memories,
Mm-hmm.
especially when those memories are when we share those memories are very reflective of the same structures that we live in right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think that's my hope as well, is that when people look at your work or engage with these histories, can also see, like, literally David Eby and Polivier made those statements like last week,
Mm-hmm.
that are directly related to, what your piece is reflecting on.
Mm.
Rita, maybe I'll give you the last question. I'm curious. Maybe it's a two-pronged question. Um, in in the sort of organizing world that you are in, how can people get involved? And yeah, maybe I'll leave it at that. In the organizing world that you're in right now, how can people get
Uh,
involved?
yeah, it's uh, there's many different ways, I think. Before I get into that question, I also earlier I wanted to say something about the Filipino working class movement here in Vancouver and the Kalayaan Center. And I was lucky to attend a workshop by Charlene Seo last year or the year before on how to be a class trader.
Mm.
Mm,
And she does a really beautiful job of kind of pointing out kind of the way class structure, even the folks who think they're middle class are really not, at the little top 1% or whatever. And the sooner that people who think they've got privilege understand that their interests are the same or similar to the folks that are so-called below, more kind of possibility is generated, I guess, by that unity or that kind of class consciousness, right?
Mhm.
That's sort of my summary of it, although she didn't quite put it that way in the workshop. But she just had us kind of situate ourselves in terms of class and thinking about how stable we are. So like let's say people have investments or something, but that can just kind of disappear pretty quickly, and you're not that far away from the precarity that we see around us, I guess. Like it's very few people that are insulated from that precarity, I guess, is
Yeah.
sort of what I took from that workshop. And they are not mostly in the circles that we run in. They're not here, you
right.
know, they're on their jets or whatever. And so anyways,
Mm.
and they've been working around temporary foreign workers issues and other issues for decades, right? So I
Mhm,
just want to acknowledge that work that is so important. And so I think that that kind of there are different workers organizations. There's a Filipino student group up at UBC that was doing some really interesting work that I ran into. Anyways, like um I would say find what what are you good at doing, what do you like doing, and what needs doing. Like when
Mm.
those three things kind of intersect, then
mhm,
that's kind of a good place to put your energy. So I don't have like one place to plug in completely, but I think for me, I'm also keeping an eye right now on what's happening at the Walbrand Valley because Elder Bill Jones from the Pachadat First Nation has called for people to come up and spend time with him up there
Mm.
to protect the land from clear cutting. Like there's
mm,
very little old growth forests left. Not everybody has the capacity to go up there, but when I've managed to get up there on the land and I'm in the presence of like 1,000-year-old trees,
Mm.
I tell you that is incredibly regenerative. Like it is
mm,
just, yes, there's RCMP enforcement and it's scary and the police are horrible and all of that. And I also thought about that when I was looking at your art because like the money that they spent suppressing these
Mhm.
worker rebellions like has only like magnified so many
mm,
times since then, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, the misuse of public funds for police brutality is also another thing that I guess we should also notice from the archives to now.
yeah.
Mhm.
And so like whether you're working on defunding the police or whether you're working on trying to support COPE through
Mhm.
keeping the city council in Vancouver accountable
Mhm,
for public services and library use and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Like, I think there are things nearby that we can all kind of plug into and pay attention to, like, budget, giving input on the budget. COPE has just recently put out a little guide to how you should respond to the city budget. That's
Mm.
helpful, I think.
mm,
There's so much work going on in the downtown east side that we've already talked about briefly. Um, there's just yeah, I think in a couple of weeks, actually next week, I think AIR, the Asian Indigenous Relations Group, they're doing a, a symposium that's bringing
Mm.
together folks on these relationships that we need to tend to, right? That we need to renew.
Mm.
mm,
So off the top of my head, like that's just a few, and I'm sure there's like a lot more. Like I mentioned, the Gitsan struggle, the Lakip firekeepers, they're used from the Gitsan Nation, who are really, they were just in town like earlier this week actually, doing press conferences and doing education outside David Eby's office,
Mm,
and working with the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. Shout
mm,
out to Melissa Lem and the work she's doing there to educate people about fracked methane gas. Like, fracked methane gas isn't something that's just abstract. It's going to affect all of us, the air we breathe, whether we have stable climate, like, it's just seeing the scale of destruction happening both provincially and federally with bills 14 and 15 and C5 federally, like, they're on like an absolute like rampage to basically destroy the natural systems that we all rely on. And so I think there's plenty for people to get involved with, whether that's reacting against this violence that's being pushed on us, or having a systemic analysis of what's going on,
mm,
developing that for yourselves. And also, the third piece of it, I think, is creating the changes that we need. So, back to mutual aid, back to care for one another, back to all the things that keep us human and to stay human. I think it's not an either or thing. Like, we cycle through these different phases at any given phase in our life. Um, but I think it's a really important time to find a one thing, whatever it is
mm.
that you can do and enjoy doing and keep doing it.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh.
just
Mm,
sorry, what I was saying about reacting and systemic analysis and
mm,
being the change that you want. I should have acknowledged that I came to those points through Reconnecting to Life workshop or a retreat many years ago. It's a
mm.
retreat for burnt out activists.
Oh.
And the other piece of that is to know that you can't do everything, but to find your piece in that, and to try to coordinate with people who are doing the rest of it, so that you're not kind of just in isolation, but you're thinking about how this sustains that, or vice versa, that there's a
Mm,
reciprocity or a larger kind of view that helps to guide us in terms of where we're going and what we're doing.
mm. That
Yeah,
sounds
and
like
that takes time.
that sounds like an amazing retreat.
It saved me after I was very burnt out after doing a lot of intense work with DARE, direct action against refugee exploitation, with
Mm,
Chinese migrants like 20 plus years ago, 25 something years ago now.
mm,
And it was that retreat that I think, helped me to find ways to keep doing the work in different ways.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you, Rita. And I love that finding something that you like to do and that you can keep
Yeah.
doing. Um, yeah, so important,
Yeah.
especially in at a time of such urgency, both with the genocide and also, this extinction machine, as you've mentioned. Yeah.
But
So,
I also want to just say
Mm.
that there is unpleasant work that also needs doing, but we can't do it all the time. Like, finding
Right.
that balance between the hard work that nobody wants to do
Yeah.
and the work that that you want to do. Like, there's kind of a
A
balancing act there.
balance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yes.
totally.
Yes. That's really powerful, Rita. Yeah. Thinking about my day-to-day work as a primary caregiver to a child, and like I was rereading this bell hooks book and about class and where she stands, and just she says we teach kids about excessive greed, right? That's frowned upon. And so it's so fascinating now, in the context of like Amazon, yeah, that this sort of consumeristic, the greed, the desire, it creates so much suffering. And
Mm-hmm.
so what really resonated with me, and I think within this conversation too, is how do we, yeah, quell that suffering within ourselves, and
Mm-hmm.
that it spreads, right? That's sustainability in the long game. And so I every day I'm instill trying to instill that in my child. Yeah, so this caregiving work for our children, for the land, I think it's all integrated, and I'm really moved, Rita, by all the work that you do on the land. I think that's very, very powerful and so tangible.
Oh, on that note, I wanted to say, I forgot to say this, but I'm doing my best to try to boycott artificial intelligence
Mm-hmm.
and work on natural intelligence, because I
Mm-hmm.
think
Yes.
we're deficient in that as a
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
society.
Yes.
Natural intelligence.
Mm.
and like in terms of land and ecology and all of that. But it's actually very hard to avoid AI. Like I'm really
Yeah.
resentful of how I feel it's foisted upon me, and I have to
Yes.
actively try to like disable it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah. And also I mean, the environmental destruction
Mm-hmm.
is required to power this massive amounts of AI that we are now sort of having, being, as you're saying, like thrust upon us.
Yeah.
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 So back to your question of what to do, I was like, figure out how to avoid it, or how to boycott it, how to like stop that thing from like wrecking more land.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you both. It was so nice to chat with you both again. Yeah, we will close this episode now.
Thank you so much.
Yay.
Yeah. Thank you both.